the voting rights in terms of the preference shares. What are the voting rights in terms of the ordinary shares? Resolutions that are placed before the company, which directly affects the rights attached to the preference shares. They've got the rights to vote over those resolutions that are taken. If dividends remains unpaid in case of cumulative preference shares, and then also in case of non-cumulative preference shares, then they've got the rights over that. They've got preference over that, and then they've got the rights over those cumulative and non-cumulative shares. All right. Now, the voting rights when it comes to the ordinary shares, which is now different from the preference shares. They do have the voting rights. During the board of directors, ordinary shares also, they can vote during the meeting with the board of directors. Value of ordinary shares also, liquidation of the company also, and they also have no stated dividend rates. When we look into the preference shares, we said fixed dividend rates. But when we look into the ordinary shares, they've got no stated dividend rates at all. But in preference shares, we've got fixed dividends rates, and also they earn on the returns of the company. They've got the rights also to earn during the returns of the company. Now, let's look into the types of preference shares. Let's look into participating preference shares. When we look into participating preference shares, always when there is a surplus that is remain after all the other shareholders have taken their portion, it means the participating preference shares still have the chance to go and participate in the surplus that is left on the table. Immediately after the other shareholders have earned their dividends, there will be a surplus that is left. The participating preference shares will always earn on the surplus that is left on the table. That is why it is referred as the participating preference shares. They participate in the surplus that remains. They will always participate in the surplus that is remain after all other shareholders have received their dividends. And then we've got also, on the other hand, cumulative preference shares. Now, cumulative preference shares would mean that if this financial year there was no dividend that was declared by the board of directors, it means they will still have a chance to accumulate into the next year. Cumulative preference shares means if there is no dividend that is declared in this present financial year, in the following financial year, they can still receive what they were supposed to receive in the previous year. So it means whatever that is left, whatever that is owed to them, they can receive it, even if it's after 2 years. If there is nothing this year, then the board of directors decide that they are not paying any dividends. If they are not paying any dividends, cumulative preference shares means they will still be able to receive what they were supposed to receive in the previous year, they can receive in the following year. So it means whatever that they were supposed to receive could be double in the following year, because the dividends were not declared in the current year, and then the following year, then there will be a declaration of dividends. Then they can receive what was owed to them in the previous year. Now, just opposite to the cumulative preference shares, we've got a non-cumulative. Those that are non-cumulative, it means in the next financial year, if there were no dividends that were declared, they will not receive anything. Compared to the cumulative preference shares, if they were supposed to receive something this year, and then there is nothing that was declared, the following year, they may not be able to receive anything. But that is contrary to the cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares, whatever that they were supposed to receive this year, then it means it carries over to the next year. It will definitely carry over to the next year. So they will receive it double. So in other words, it means it has now accumulated to the following year. So they will still receive that. Non-cumulative, they will not receive anything. So there will be no compensation that is given to them. But in terms of the cumulative, they will still be compensated for whatever that they were supposed to receive and they couldn't receive it during that financial year. Then we've got convertible preference shares. And then convertible preference shares simply means it is possible for them to be converted into ordinary shares. You own these convertible preference shares and then you want to convert them to ordinary shares, then it is possible for these shares to be converted to ordinary preference shares. Basically, this is a short summary of the different types of shares and their definitions. So when we prepare ourselves, we must be able to distinguish clearly between every type of preference shares and those that are ordinary shares. Then, when we look into the different types of investment also, it is more important to take into account debentures. And when we look into the debentures, basically we are saying it is an instrument indicating that a company has borrowed a certain amount of money from a particular individual. If a company decides to borrow money from a particular individual, there's a certificate called a debenture. A debenture will be issued now and given over to the person from whom the company borrows money. A debenture will be that particular document that is given to a person from whom the company tries to raise money by borrowing money from that particular individual. And then the very same debenture would always earn interest. As long as the debenture certificate is issued to the person from whom the company has borrowed money, then there will always be interest that is bearing on that particular debenture. Then dividends. A dividend is a payment made to shareholders out of the profits that a firm makes. A most important appropriate weight that could be used in terms of payment or in terms of the earnings that a person would get. When we talk about shares, then we talk dividends. When we talk about shares, then we talk about dividends. It means the word dividends is only used for earnings in terms of the shares. Those dividends that are paid, the money that is paid at the end of the financial year to the shareholders, that is basically termed, or it is called dividends. Then we talk about stock. Then consolidated value of fully paid up shares of a particular member. If that particular shares is fully paid up, then we refer to that one as the stock. Basically what the company owns, what the company have as an asset, that is basically part of the stock of the company. Now, when we do calculations, it's more important than to note that we've got two ways in which we can calculate. Then we've got simple interest. It simply means that interest is calculated on the original or the principal amount only. Simple interest simply means that now when you do your calculations, the amount that is the principal amount, the interest will only be calculated out of that principal amount. But we will also look into the compounded interest, which is now different from this one. This one, it's the principal amount only where the capital, where the interest will be added. The money charged on the fixed amount by the lender for the borrower for the certain period. That money that is charged, if it's charged for 3 years, it's on simple interest, it is only charged on the original amount. The interest charged in case of a simple interest remains fixed for all the years. As I said, if it is borrowed for a period of 3 years, if the money is borrowed for a period of 3 years, the money will remain in a fixed rate up until the end of that particular period. So that is basically how the interest is charged in terms of the simple interest. Accumulated interest for the prior period is not used in calculations for the following period. Remember, when we've got the compounded interest, whatever the amount that has accumulated, the very same whole amount will be used in terms of calculating interest for the previous for the forthcoming period, which is different from the simple interest. So accumulated interest from prior periods is not used in calculating for the following period. Very important. These are the key definition and the explanation of the simple interest. Now, we've got compounded interest, which is directly different from the simple interest. Compounded interest simply means that now, whatever the amount that you have borrowed this year, it will accumulate interest. Then immediately, the following year, the whole interest that was accumulated, it is added to the principal amount. Adding those interests to the principal amount means now the interest is compounded. Compound interest is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Most of the institutions, most of the banks, when they give you money, they expect to use this compounded interest method. This is the method that they use, and they earn interest on interest. Basically what happens is they will earn interest on interest. They earn interest on interest. Calculated each period on the original principal amount and all interest accumulated during the past period. All interest that are accumulated in a certain period of time, when the other period starts, then the calculation will be to the whole amount, not only to the principal amount, but to the whole amount that is basically was given to you. So that is compounded. Adding accumulated interest back to the principal interest, so that interest is earned on interest. When we look especially on this column here, adding accumulated interest back to the principal, so that interest is earned on interest. Most importantly about this one now is different from the simple interest, and most institutions that we always borrow money from, they like to use compounded and not simple interest. But it's more important when you prepare yourself for examination that you take into account what a particular question, if there is a calculation, what a particular question would really require. If the calculation should be done on a compound interest or it should be done on simple interest. So more important, because you will be able to get the correct answer if you have chosen a correct method of calculation of interest also. The act of declaring interest to be principal is called compounding. Compounding means the act of declaring the very same principal amount to be interest itself. Then it becomes compounding interest. That is, interest is now compounded. The interest will be doubled, and then the interest will still be doubled.